Yeah, great. So I'm delighted to be joined by Calvin Robinson, who is a prominent writer, school governor, I think a former teacher, is that right?
Absolutely, former assistant principal.
Former assistant principal, no less. A campaign champion for Defund the BBC, and is a prominent supporter of the Don't Divide Us Now campaign, which fights both kind of traditional racism and the kind of ultra woke identity politics, which comes pretty close to racism in some cases. So yeah, I mean, first of all, thank you very much for your time.
Not at all. Pleasure to be here.
I mean, do you think we're winning now in terms of the battle against kind of ultra identity politics, woke politics?
Oh, that's a good question. If you asked me months ago, I would have said we've lost the culture wars, and now it's about the next war, bringing it back. But at this point, I feel like we've made so much progress over the last few weeks alone. It's fantastic to see. Seeing the Equalities Minister stand up in the House of Commons, and say, "Look, this is not okay. You cannot teach young people these ideologies as if they are facts. It's not appropriate." And I'm like, "Yeah, thank you. This is all we've been asking for."
I saw that clip because it got millions and millions of views on Twitter. Went absolutely viral. I mean, clearly there's like a demand for this kind of opinion, this kind of content. I mean, is that something you experienced with your campaign, but with the Don't Divide Us? You're surprised how many people were interested.
Absolutely. So the whole point of Don't Divide Us is it's offering a positive alternative, right? So there's so much negativity out there at the moment. We're saying, look, let's stop splitting people up based on the color of their skin, and let's bring everyone back together. And here, from a teaching perspective, I'm like, here are some resources you can take if you want to teach about these things without compromising your values and without being infested in critical race theory and all these toxic ideologies. But it's all about positivity and unity over division. And there's so much division in society these days that I think things like Don't Divide Us or need us. But to answer your question, yes, we get so many emails and letters and calls from people who say, look, this is happening in our school, or this is happening at my place of work. What can I do about it? And just being able to offer people support, or just being able to say, yeah, you're not alone, makes such a difference to people, I found.
Yeah. One thing I found really interesting with the US presidential election, which I don't know if this is a turning point or not, but I mean, I'm very against Trump, but it was very interesting how he significantly increased his support amongst both Black and Hispanic voters, which kind of suggests that the narrative that we've been getting over the past few months, which has been seeing everything in increasingly racialized terms, just doesn't seem to be reflected on the ground. Is that the perception you had?
I think people look at what's happening and people see that the far left are taking over the left of politics. So in this country, we've got the Labour Party has gone to the extreme left. In the US, they've got the Democrats who have gone to the extreme left. And that's not helpful to anyone, because these far left parties are rooted in identity politics, and it's pinning everyone down to the color of their skin or to their gender or their sexuality. And people actually, I think people stop and think, I'm more than the color of my skin, I'm more than my sexuality, and I'm more than my gender. So to try and pigeonhole me based on those things and tell me how to vote because of those immutable characteristics, the things about me that I can't change, is actually patronizing, racist, sexist, and all of the isms and ists. And I think people look at Trump and say, you know what? He might be a bit of a, he's a bit of a joker. He's not necessarily statesman-like. He's not the kind of president we're used to, but he's fighting against this woke nonsense. And, the economy has been good under him. He's the first president in a long time not to take the country to war. In fact, he's practically bringing peace to the Middle East. These aren't insignificant things. These are quite tremendous fates that he's managed to pull together. So I think, holistically, he's actually not been a bad president. And I think Biden would be atrocious in comparison. And when you look at those, they're the two options, really. It makes sense to me that most people are choosing, or most people of ethnic minority status are choosing to support Trump.
One thing I found really interesting, I mean, both in the US and the UK over the summer, is obviously there's this big move to defund the police, which meant different things to different people. But when you polled it, I mean, it polled really, really badly with Black voters, especially poor Black voters, poor Latino voters. I mean, it almost felt like a kind of movement of the upper middle class liberals. I mean, is that something you saw? Do you think there was a big disconnect between the people who claim to speak for certain communities and what those communities actually think?
100%. We've seen that Black Lives Matter, for example, the riots, or as they like to call them, protests, were mostly upper middle class white kids who were bored, had nothing better to do, and or had were well intentioned and thought they were solving racism and racial inequality or whatever that they perceive to be prevalent in our country or countries, if you're referring to both the US and the UK. But actually, that's not the case. And actually, most people from ethnic minority backgrounds in the UK are supportive of the police. They want a strong police force because they know what it's like to come from places without them. And especially, first generation immigrants are very much in favor of a strong police force and tend to be small c conservative in their values. So it's not supportive of the people that it purports to be supporting.
Yeah, well, it's very interesting because I say, obviously, you're a former teacher. And you taught a school which is famous for being quite tough on discipline, and it gets very good results as a result. But I mean, it's quite an interesting thing. But does it sometimes seem to you like is it kind of the educational elite? I mean, I don't want to use the word elite too much, but the educational elite are kind of looked down on being a disciplinarian. They think it's harsh, unacceptable. But at the same time, a lot of them send their own kids to, either private schools or very nice state schools. And they don't have the same issues. It's the same with law and order, the same with policing, where, there's almost a kind of middle class or upper middle class class identity, which clashes really violently with what so many working class, middle class people think.
Completely. I think it's double standards, isn't it? It's what we often call the soft bigotry of low expectations, because on the one hand, they're saying, these kids are from deprived backgrounds, or these kids, have a struggle, or these kids over here are of an ethnic minority status. So let's not expect the same standards from them. Let's expect something else, something lesser. And in fact, what they're doing is lowering their standards and expectations. And as a result, patronizing and essentially keeping down or holding down the people that they're trying to support. In fact, what they need to do is raise expectations for every young person. And that's what we see in the successful schools like Michaela, like Bedford Free School, Dixon's Trinity, King Solomon Academy. These schools have high expectations for all children, regardless of where they come from. And that's how kids thrive. That's how they learn. That's how they move on. And we see, our politicians, particularly our left-wing politicians like the ones in the Labour Party, send their children to grammar schools or private schools, but then they campaign to remove grammar schools and close private schools. So there's a double standards there across the board that I find disgusting, to be honest with you.
I mean, I was reading one of your articles before this interview, and one thing I found really interesting is you're talking about why critical race theory is so dangerous. And obviously you're saying it's dangerous to, white and poor white working class kids, which I think kind of most people agree with. But you also argued, I thought it was very interesting, that it's dangerous for black kids. And could you kind of expand on that a bit?
Absolutely. Look, for young people in our classrooms, what we tell them is important because we are figures of authority. So if we stand at the front of the classroom and tell those kids that, your life is going to be hard because of the color of your skin, you're going to have hurdles that you're going to have to overcome, this systemic, institutional, racist society that you live in is holding you back and holding you down. If you say that often enough, they'll start to believe it. Whereas, I'm of the mentality that we should actually say, we live in the best country in the world and it's the best time to be alive. And you have pretty much equal opportunities in this country. It's a free country. You can do whatever you like to do. If you keep your head down, if you work hard enough, you can make a success of your life, and that's up to you. And giving them the responsibility and the freedom, again, to be whatever they want to be rather than pinning them down. And that's where critical race theory and identity politics all comes into play. It's a power struggle. It's all about holding people back and keeping them under control so that you have their vote and you stay in power.
Yeah, I mean, I found it interesting that, because obviously traditionally racial politics in a very negative way was probably associated with the hard or far right, and still is to some extent, unfortunately. But why do you think it was that such a big section of the left adopted this ultra-racial way of looking at politics? What we know, way of white fragility, and you kind of judge people by what their ancestors may or may not have done 200 years ago, or just people what their skin colour may have done 200 years ago.
Exactly it, James. Far left have adopted the policies of the far right. They're using white supremacy. They flipped the argument around and they're using it in their own favor now. Because Marxism didn't work, did it? They can't argue from a class structure anymore because the Labour Party, for example, is, headed by a knight of the realm, a very prominent barrister. Most of the front benches are quite well off. In fact, the Labour Party, more of their members went to good universities universities than the Conservative Party. So they don't have that class base anymore. They can't say, we are the working class, we are one of you. So what they've done is they've left all that behind. The far left now is saying, we're here to protect the underdogs of society, of this racist society. We're here to protect the BMEs. So if you're a BME, you have to vote for us. And of course, we know that's not the case, but it's a good argument to put forward, especially when they say we are the anti-racists, and if you're not an anti-racist, you must be a racist, because everything's binary these days, and it's not the case either, is it? This anti-racism front is just another political tool. It's a weapon. They're weaponizing racism. And racism is a problem in our society. It is a thing that we need to work on. But we can't do that while it's undermined and they're treating everything as racism and bringing it into every argument where it doesn't exist. There's so many problems in our society come down to class and wealth and all kinds of socio-economic factors. So to pin it all on race is disingenuous, I think.
Yeah. So essentially you think that because the left has failed in kind of class terms, it's trying to find almost like an alternative to that old Marxist proletariat ideology, analysis, and has gone for race and is presumably going to mess it up in the same way.
Absolutely, they shifted the argument from class to race, and it's the same old Marxism. It's NeoMarxism essentially, and they want to break down our way of life and rebuild society in their own image. They're anti-police, they're anti-capitalism, they're anti-family, they're anti-Semitic. All of the things that we are, as a country, are proud to support, they're against them, and that's why I find them so dangerous and worrying.
One thing I found sort of interesting about critical race theory and white politics, it seems to do best where there's no electorate involved. So the place it's strong are places like universities, maybe to some extent schools, certain media outlets, but anywhere where elections come, where actual people get to vote, it seems to fall down. As to a limited extent, we saw in America earlier this week where some of the more extreme Democrats did very badly, even in states where Joe Biden did quite well. Is that your kind of perception of it? Is it a movement that is very much elitist, and once it comes into contact with the general public, it doesn't do very well?
Well, the biggest problem in our society at the moment is the metropolitan liberal elite, and they have a certain perspective that is not really aligned with the rest of the country. The majority of the United Kingdom are small c conservative in their values, probably middle ground economically, if not a little bit left wing. But the metropolitan liberal elite have their own political agenda. They want to push that on everyone. They want everyone to become social justice warriors, anti-racist and pro gender theory and queer theory and all these things that they're not supporting black people or gay people or trans people, but they're pushing them into pigeonholes again and bracketing people to control their vote. And that's, it's sinister.
I don't know if this is how you see it, but certainly to me, it sometimes seems like with some of this stuff, there's almost like a quasi-religious element. It's about sort of, upholding standards, finding the heretics, imposing cultural norms on as many people as you can. And that actually makes very little difference to people's material conditions, in terms of how much they're getting paid, how they're being treated at work, that kind of thing. I don't know if that's something you think at all.
I think it is. I think, we used to be a Christian country and we've kind of lost our way, but people are still faithful and people are still spiritual and they're searching. And what they happen to find, people want to belong to something, and they find things like Extinction Rebellion and Black Lives Matter, all these movements that look well-intentioned and they cling onto them. And these movements develop their own rituals. Extinction Rebellion have vestments and sacrifices and all kinds of weird rituals going on now, but they are religious, they are cultish. I think they've become, societal cults, but it's based on people's, not lack of faith, but people's loss. People are kind of searching for something and they don't know where to find it. And I think that's why the established church should stand up and say, look, we are here for you, we're here to support you and help you, especially in things like lockdown, and re-establish that, this is a Christian country.
Obviously, countries always have an elite. But some elites are more tolerant of dissent than others. And it does seem at the moment that, I guess, what you might call the kind of woke left or section of the elite is very intolerant of dissent. Is that something you've encountered personally?
Unfortunately, yes. I found that the so-called tolerant left are not very tolerant at all. Now, the message is all about giving black people a voice and listening more to black people and taking their feedback on board, listening to their lived experiences, as they call it, as if there's any other kind of experience. But whenever I open my mouth, I seem to get shut down, if not abused, quite racially often, from white people and black people. All kinds of people have been hurling abuse at me for not subscribing to the approved narrative. So I don't understand the argument if you're saying we need to hear from more black people, and then it's, oh, well, but not you, because you're the wrong type of black person. And you can't argue for equality and then on the other hand not expect to have a diverse range of opinions from a group of people. You can't expect all people that look alike to think alike and act alike. That is racist.
I mean, it almost sometimes feels like the left feels it has ownership over certain ethnicities. I remember, I think it was a couple of years back, but do you remember that tweet the Labour Party put out about we can unlock the talents of, I think it was Black and Asian Britons. And it was just, how patronising is that?
Everyone wants to unlock my talent, and then in America we have Biden saying, if you ain't black, if you don't vote Democrat, you ain't black.
Yeah.
It's all patronising, isn't it? It's kind of, again, reminding you, we owe you. No, sorry, we own you. You owe us your votes, and I find that very worrying as well. Nobody owns me, and I don't owe my vote to anybody. I can make up my mind based on what I see and the policies that I like or don't like. And I think you'll find in any aspect of life, no two people will think alike, regardless of their skin color. To assume that they do, again, is inherently racist. And we need to move the left away from this, because the left didn't used to be about that. They used to be about protecting the vulnerable and minorities, and they've lost their way.
Does it seem odd to you that certainly some of the arguments kind of the woke left are putting forward now are very similar to what 20, 30 years ago the far right were putting forward, and to some extent still do put forward? So, for example, cultural appropriation. 20, 30 years ago, the far right used to hate it when white people got dreadlocks. They saw them as kind of race traitors, and they're kind of, they're leaving their culture, they're betraying their culture. And now the woke left, for quite a different reason, to come to exactly the same conclusion. And so I think there was a plan to, or at least it was discussed about in the summer, to kind of try and create an all-black university in the UK. And you kind of think that that's something that Nick Griffin and the woke left would both agree on. And doesn't that scare you?
It does absolutely scare me. I think we need to highlight this more. We need to show the far left what they're doing, because I don't think they realize, actually, a lot of people that have been brought on board, they think they're doing the right thing, but this is segregation. This is apartheid that they're promoting here. The idea that black people are so precious they need to go to a different university or have a different bathroom or a different sink, a different water fountain. We've been down this road before, maybe not in this country, but we're certainly thinking about it at this point, and we're adopting this rather from America. This is, America went through the civil rights movement not too long ago. Black people in their country haven't had equality for a long time, but that's not the case over here. We've got a very different history. So to be taking the drama and the policies from America and importing them over here doesn't make sense in our context.
Yeah. So Calvin, it's been a real pleasure. I'm very grateful for your time. And thanks a lot.
No problem at all. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.